All right. So let's get started. Thanks everybody for joining. And for those of you who are watching later in the taped version, thanks for watching. We really appreciate you tuning in. So today we are going to talk about all of your E2 questions. Anything that you've got, go ahead and type it in. We'll get to as many as we can. So we may not get to your question exactly, but hopefully we will answer as many as we can. Let's get started. Oh, so I was going to ask for a question, but it says, thank you for your support. You're very welcome. It is my pleasure. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So let's just get started right away with the E-2 visa. So one of the questions that we're starting to get, this is a trending topic, not a common topic, but what do you think Donald Trump's going to do about the E-2 visa? And the answer is nobody knows, right? I mean, nobody knows anything, but we do have a template. He's already been president for 4 years, and during that time, he actually approved 2 new E-2 countries. And so I'm hoping maybe he'll do that again. You never know, right? Maybe he'll actually add to the treaty countries. We did not see any significant decline in approvals or anything up until COVID hit. And then when that happened, everything kind of went haywire. And in some cases, some of those countries are not back. What I mean by that is their consulates fell so far behind that they are still catching up years later, which is truly unfortunate. And I don't know that Donald Trump is going to be somebody who's going to put more money toward the consulates and embassies for this type of thing. I don't know the answer to that. It doesn't seem probably like one of his top priorities. However, it wasn't Biden's top priority either, because he could have eliminated all of this and chose not to do that. But I don't believe that there is going to be any serious consequences in a negative way for the E-2 visa. At least at this point, I don't see any reason to even believe that. So with that said, let's get to some of the more common questions, shall we, about the E-2 visa. One of the ones that I get all the time is about what type of business should I start or buy? And the answer is any type of business that you want to start or buy. Almost anything is eligible for the E-2 visa as long as the business is, of course, legal, obviously, right? So I do get a question sometimes about any type of marijuana-based business, because there are states where marijuana-based business is legal. However, it's not legal for the E-2 because it's not legal on a federal level. Remember, immigration is federal law, meaning it's the same for all 50 states. And so they will only go what's legal on a federal level. So if you have a marijuana-based business, it's not legal. You can't do it for the E-2 visa, okay? As far as other types of businesses, people say, oh, is it better to do a franchise or start your own? Is it better to buy or do a startup? We've had success with all of those. So that really doesn't matter. You still just have to meet the E-2 visa requirements, right? That's the main thing. What are the requirements? Number one is ownership. You have to own a majority of the business, and you need to be from a treaty country. Your passport needs to be from a treaty country, right? Your source of funds. Where did this money come from? How can we trace it? How do we know where the money came from? Number three, that you've invested a substantial amount. Right? What is the answer to that? There is no answer. Unfortunately, I wish I could give you a dollar amount, but I can't. Usually we recommend that you invest at least $100,000 for a very, very basic startup business. If you are purchasing a business, or if you are making a business that's a little bit more expensive to start, for example, like a manufacturing business, the answer there is the substantial amount ready to get it operational. Right? So if you feel like you're starting a manufacturing company and it's going to cost $1 million in order for you to process your first sale, then you're going to need to invest probably close to $1 million, right? You got to get that business to the point of operations. If you're buying a business that's $500,000, then you probably need to invest a minimum of, $400,000 or so. Okay, it's a proportionality scale. So the cheaper the business, the lower the investment. The more expensive the business, probably the more the investment, but the lower the percentage of that cost. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So we're starting to get a few questions rolling in. Thanks so much for that. Could we use the funds from a 401k as investment for the E-2 visa? Yes, as long as you can show where the money for the 401k came from, and then when you're cashing out, moving it to a personal account, that type of thing. Yeah, any type of source that's legal generally can work for this. Now, there are some exceptions, right? If you're getting money from your business partner, things like that, we don't like that at all. But whatever your personal accounts are, as long as we can show that those funds that are in those personal accounts were gained by a legal source, then generally they can count. Yeah. Non-cash to meet the 100,000. Can we use intangible property? Intangible property, maybe tangible property? But basically, can we use the value of things, right, to show as investment? Now, the answer to that is a little bit more complicated. The answer is maybe. First of all, you have to show that whatever that property is directly related to the business. Second of all, we have to show the source of funds to purchase that property. Third of all, we have to show the value of that property. Let me give you an example of a case that I actually had years ago, that it worked, and it was a little bit unusual, but we really had a lot of tracing and tracking to do, but we made it work. So this woman was starting an embroidery company, like a really high-end embroidery for police departments, things like that. She would make all of the patches and badges, those types of things. So she had a business similar to that in her home country. So she had these very expensive embroidery machines, but she had purchased the machine 15 years prior. So what did we do? We had to trace the funds of how she bought that machine to begin with to show that it's actually legally hers and she bought it with legal funds. Then we had to show the value of it. So now this thing is 10 or 15 years old. It's not the same. It's not worth what she paid for it. We had an appraisal done through the company that actually made this machine. They appraised the value of the machine. And so we were able to use that value. I don't remember what the value is, but let's just say that she paid $30,000 for the machine 10 years ago. The company valued it at 15,000. So the value now of that property is $15,000. Okay. So $15,000 of the investment we have right through the property. Now, keep in mind, any property that you're going to use as part of the investment value must be physically located in the United States at the time of application, all the way through the time of the investment or the interview. Okay. Here's where that really comes in handy for those of you wanting to start trucking business. Many of you say, oh, I already have a truck and whatever. That's fine. But that truck will need to be in the United States from the time that we apply till the time of your interview. Depending on where you're from, depending on a variety of factors, that could be 8, 12, 16 weeks. You will not have access to those items. They will be in the United States, used for the US business. So you have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about, oh, am I going to use this as part of the investment, that type of thing. You will be without those items for potentially months. So if you have a business in your home country that has nothing to do with the US business, maybe you don't care. Fine, I don't need them, whatever. I'll use them when I get there. But if you are currently running a business that needs those items, you may not be able to use it. Okay, so something to think about. Let's see. Rick, we run an e-commerce business in Canada and want to start in the US. We are authorized retailers for some of the top skincare brands. How would investment look like? We'd be spending money to buy inventory. Yes. Yeah, so you can do that type of thing. Yes. I mean, the investment's going to be for inventory. You always have to have some sort of physical space. Generally speaking, you can run an online business, but we like as much actual brick and mortar retail as possible. Why? Because, Rick, of what you just said, we run this business already from Canada. And what we don't want is when you go into the interview, they go, well, it looks like you're already running it from Canada. Why don't you continue to do that? Right. So you've got to, whenever you have services or things that are based online, you've got to connect as much as you can to the US, physical presence, employees, that type of thing. Right. Otherwise, they're like, just keep running it the way you're doing it. Looks like you're doing great. Congratulations. Head back to Canada. Right? We don't want that. We want you here. So we have to make those connections to show why you need to be here. It's really, really important. Okay. Keep that in mind for anybody. We always recommend that you have an office space along with a warehouse. If you need a warehouse, you may not need that for your type of business, but you're going to need an office space because you've got to show that this business is connected, physically connected, geographically connected to the United States. So always keep that mind. Let's see. I've owned an IT company. We ah, went to UC's, right? Love it. Buy assets while on an E2, a house and a car. Oh, well, yeah, you can. As far as we actually do have a video with my friend Vivian who does mortgages that may have some more information regarding what it's like as a non-immigrant to the United States to be able to get a mortgage. That really has nothing to do with the E2 at all. That would be after it. But I can tell you this: there are plenty of people who have no visa whatsoever that own houses, cars, and everything in the United States. You don't need any sort of visa for that. You may need visas in order to get funding for that. But if you just have $1 million cash laying around and you want to buy a house or whatever, you can. It doesn't give you any right to live here or work here or anything, but you can own property in the United States. You don't need any sort of visa for that. So hopefully that helps. Let's see what else. We've got a lot coming through, so I'm trying to find one that I think will we let's see. Okay, talk about the E2 renewal and the requirements. So every country, what are the requirements for the E2 renewal? Every country has their own requirements. Okay. That's the unfortunate part because there's not just one. But I can tell you, generally speaking, what they're focused on. And that is two requirements. One is marginality and two is real and operating. Okay. So for those, that's really the focus on renewal. So what is included in marginality? Marginality says we're making enough money. This business is not marginal. That's their language, not ours, of course. Meaning we've got employees that we're paying. We have enough revenues to live on and for employees to be paid. So they're going to be looking at your P&L, your balance sheet, your latest tax returns. Some countries ask for the last 2 returns, some will ask for the last 3, some will ask for 1. Again, it really depends. You're also going to need to show the real and operating. We currently have clients, we're currently making money, we are currently making sales, that type of thing. Those are the things that they're most interested in on renewal. Now, as mentioned, every single country is different. Also, every country has to renew at a different time. Right? So some people will be renewing after they've only had the E2 for 2 years. Some people will be renewing after 5, some after 7, almost 7 years. So there are going to be a lot of different requirements depending on that as well. The rule is that the business has to meet all of the requirements, meaning not marginal, real and operational. Well, not marginal, really. 5 years after the issuance of the E2. So of course you need as many employees and revenues as you can get all the time, but that's where the rubber is going to really meet the road, right? Is at 5 years. Okay. So always keep that in mind. Once you get that E2 and you've passed 5 years, you better have significant revenues and employees. No, there are no minimums for either one of those, but enough to support yourself, enough to support employees. That's going to be really important. And that's really the focus for the most part of the renewals. Let's see. Let's see. There are a lot coming through, so I'm trying to find some that are going to be useful for others. Changing status. So yeah, okay. So let's talk a little bit about changing status versus going to the consulate. Um, it depends on where you're from, which one we recommend. In most cases, we're going to recommend that you go to the consulate. Why is that? Because in many cases, the consulate offers you travel flexibility and they offer the visa for a longer period of time, right? So that means fewer renewals, travel flexibility. But that is country by country. Okay, so that's really, really important. Before you make that decision, you need to know what the term is visa reciprocity is, right? So if you're from Canada, lots of our clients are from Canada, your reciprocity is generally going to be 5 years. You can come and go from the United States as you please. Okay, but in Canadian cases, almost without exception, we recommend that you go to the consulate. There have been a couple of things here or there why we would recommend a status change for a Canadian, but in almost every case, and I'm saying 99.4% of the cases, we're going to recommend that you go to the consulate in Toronto if you're a Canadian. Mexico, another common E-2 visa country, they have a reciprocity of 4 years, and you can come and go as you please. That's great. Now, UK, 5 years. Australia just moved to 5 years. These are some of the more common countries. However, there are some countries that only allow for 3 months and no international travel. In those cases, you might as well just change your status. What's the difference between going to the consulate and going to or changing your status through USCIS? So through USCIS, that means you don't leave the country. You don't go to the consulate. You just stay right where you're at. We file a bunch of documents in paper, actual paper. We have to mail, and then they review. And then from there, if you're approved, you get 2 years, no international travel at all. Okay. So you can see why in some of the countries that allow for 3, 4, 5 years with all the international travel you want, why it's better to go to the consulate. If you are from a country that has no travel flexibility and a very short period of time, yes, changing status is okay. But just keep in mind, if you change status, let's say that you were doing that. Let's say that you're from Canada and for whatever reason, you decide you want to change status. So what you're going to do is you have to be in the United States a minimum of 90 days before you can even apply for that. Okay. And then you wait and hopefully you get approved and they approve you, let's say on February 1 of 2025. Generally, you're going to be authorized to stay as an E-2 until January 31st, 2027. But let's say that your great Aunt Millie gets very sick in April of this year, only a couple of months later, and you think, oh my gosh, my great Aunt Millie, she's amazing, and I can't bear to not be with her. She's very ill. So you go to your home country to visit great Aunt Millie. No problem. The issue is you can't come back without an interview at the US consulate, right? So once you're out, you can't come back in as an E-2. You have to go to the consulate, get a visa, then re-enter the United States. Then you can be here as an E-2. So something to keep in mind, if you feel like you're ever going to need to leave the United States, going to the consulate is generally the best idea. Of course, again, you have to keep in mind your circumstances, your visa reciprocity, that type of thing. So keep all of those things in mind. Really depends on your country, the visa reciprocity, and your certain circumstances. But we almost always recommend going to the consulate. Almost always. Our kids need to leave and come back to Canada when they're 21 unless they transition into other businesses. Is that or visas? Is that correct? And the answer is yes. Regardless of when your kids get an E-2 visa. Let's say you get an E-2 visa today and your child is 5 years old. No problem. The kid can continue on the E-2 visa as long as you continue to renew and get approved. The kid can renew and get approved till the day they turn 21. The day they turn 21, they're out. No more E-2 visa ever. So at that point, they have to either get a different type of visa, which most kids are in college at that time. So they'll end up getting like an F1 visa, which is a student visa, or they need to return to their home country or figure out some other type of visa. So yes, kids will age out at 21, regardless of when they got the E-2. Okay. No matter what age they are at 21, they will age out. So that's always something to keep in mind when you're applying with children, right? If they're young, you may have chance to figure out another thing, or maybe not. I don't know. But let's see. So we're going to give it one more minute. I think 20 minutes about the E-2 visa is plenty for most people, right? It's a topic I could talk about for years and years and hours and days, but I know it gets a little long for most. So we'll take one final question here, and then after that, I would ask you to reach out anytime, and we can discuss the facts of your case and that type of thing. So let us ask about. Let's see. Non-cash. Oh, we already talked about that one. Family has applied for the I-130. So the answer is it really depends a lot on when your I-130 was filed. If you can successfully get an E-2 visa, your I-130 is for a green card. So the E-2 visa is a single intent visa. Keep that in mind. So if you have a green card pending, there's always a chance that they could say, I feel like maybe you're not going to be returning to your home country. Now, we have filed for people who have pending I-130s and pending I-140s. However, their priority date, which I'm sure you know if you have a pending I-130 or a pending I-140, their priority date is always more than 2 years out. Right? So again, that depends a lot on when it was filed, how it was filed, who was on the application, all of those things. But we will at least entertain taking cases where the I-130 priority date is more than 2 years from the date of your interview, right? Not from today, but the date of your interview. Okay. So with that, thank you all. I know I didn't get to every single question, but I hope I answered a lot of them. So thank you so much for all of that. If you have any questions about the E-2 visa or the E-1, which we didn't even touch on, but the E-1 or the E-2 visa, please reach out anytime. We would love to speak with you about your E-2 visa. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks so much.